introduce the chapter governor of Jacksonville, who will give the welcoming remarks. So with that, Javier Salinas.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good morning. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to St. Augustine for our annual meeting of Granaderos and Damas de Galvez. St. Augustine will be celebrating this coming year the 450th anniversary as the first city of the United States of America and of the Americas. I welcome you today for what I think will be a most interesting and educational meeting to commemorate the contributions of the Crown of Spain and the cause for the independence of the United States. Your host chapter has prepared an agenda which presents in great detail the life and accomplishments of Bernardo de Galvez, and I'm sure you'll find this enjoyable and entertainment. Once again, welcome to St. Augustine.
Thank you, Javier. Javier, in addition to being the governor of the Jacksonville chapter, of course, is the deputy governor general of the national order. We will now have something that's going to be added to the program here that was mentioned this morning, and I'm going to ask the chapter governors to come forward and introduce the members present from your chapter. I'll go ahead and start with the San Antonio chapter. I am Joe Perez with the San Antonio chapter, and we also have Richard Wynot from the San Antonio chapter, who drove from San Antonio and left last Saturday and made several stops along the way, kind of following Galvez's path to Mobile and to Pensacola and so forth. I will now ask Javier Salinas if you could introduce the members of your chapter.
Susan and John Bass, Chris and Jackie Rooney, then Mauricio and Sally Mang, Alejandro Radi and Diana Radi, Jackie and oh my dear wife.
You don't want to forget that, Javier.
Everybody?
The Washington, D.C. chapter could not make it. Hector Diaz is the governor of that chapter. They actually have a big event going on today, living history reenactment going on up there. He was not able to make it, but he sends his regards. Also, the representative from the Pensacola chapter could not make it this morning due to a death in the family. So I'm going to ask Mr. Chris Rooney if you could stand and give information on that.
Please try to pretend that I'm Nan Harper. I did want to say that the Pensacola chapter was extremely busy during the past year with many achievements, including a travel to Spain where they met in the Zarzuela Palace in Madrid, and they met with delegates of the mission in Machavarria in the province of Malaga. And they also sponsored the painting, which we will talk about later, that's going to be hung in the Capitol. And just numerous accomplishments, including participating in their own Pensacolan events. So we will be giving a complete presentation and putting in the record their accomplishments.
Very good, thank you. And the chapter governor of the Houston chapter, Richard Espinosa, introduce your members, please.
I'd like to first of all introduce Dr. Crimm. She's a very active member in our chapter. We're very, very fortunate to have her. She's a qualifier and a compendium of historical knowledge, and very, very excellent speaker. And of course, I'd like to introduce my wife, Mary Lee, who's also very active in the chapter. Houston has a very dynamic chapter now. We are really enthusiastic. We have over 50 members. go on several out-of-city functions, and I'm gonna go into those later, but one of them was a Washington Day Parade in Laredo. We were VIP guests of the city manager, and we got to sit in the VIP booth, and we go to just about all the functions they had there. We also made an excellent trip, 6 to 8 days, depending on who stayed over, to Mexico City. That was extremely informative to me. We had, and I'll go over it again, some of the things we did, but and our own Dr. Crimm was able to speak at the university. And there was even the ambassador to Mexico, the wife of the ambassador was there. We went to Galveston. We did the colors at the Chamber of Commerce. It was their 175th anniversary of the city of Galveston. We were all, I think there was about 15 of us in uniform. Let's see. We do have semi-annual inductions. On one of the inductions, we inducted 15 people at one time. But there's quite a few other things that we've done as a chapter. We are very, very fortunate in having a lot of people that have educational backgrounds. We are putting together some material that can be used to go to the high schools and junior high schools and even the grade schools to tell people more about this. Now, we also have made our own brochures, which I've passed out to you sort of as a flyer, because we get stopped all the time wearing uniform. People want to know about our organization, and we're able to give them this. It tells them a lot. It also tells them how to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to see that all the chapters are very active and have been throughout the year. And as he mentioned, Houston has just got so much momentum going right now. It's fantastic. I now have to give the minutes of the 2013 annual meeting, last year's meeting, which was hosted by the Houston chapter in Houston. It was conducted on October 11th through the 13th, 2013. There were 27 attendees at last year's meeting. The meeting opened at 9 o'clock. Call to order was given by then Governor General Joel Escamilla. Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem were given. A roll call of the chapters was presented. The group adjourned for introduction tour of the Bayou Bend, followed by an excellent lunch buffet. After lunch, the reports of the Houston chapter and Jacksonville chapters were presented. Richard Espinosa presented the report for the Houston chapter. Joel Escamilla presented the report for the Jacksonville chapter. Then the group heard an excellent presentation regarding the Bernardo de Galvez statue project in Galveston. And I don't know if y'all have heard about that, but there's a very nice project going on right now to erect a statue of Galvez in Galveston. Galveston has the hotel after Galvez. It's got the streets, it's got the city name, the Galveston Bay, but no statue. So they're working on that. And that's the ones leading that are the Sons of the American Revolution chapter. It's actually the Galvez chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. So he gave an excellent presentation on that and also had the artist present to talk about that and field questions. After that, Joe Perez gave the San Antonio chapter report, presented information on a website for the San Antonio chapter. The business meeting continued with the national report and election of officers. The vote was taken, and Joe Perez was nominated as the Governor General. We're going to see later on this afternoon that that's going to be transferred over. An annual report was given for each chapter with the information on their activities and their their treasury. The meeting was adjourned for a tour of the Clayton Library, an overview of the genealogical archive and Cuban papers, Galvez research, and was presented by librarian Clinton Drake. After the tour, we had a garden reception hosted by Maria Carmen and Melanie at the Briarhurst Gardens. It was beautiful, and just like last night at the Salinas' home, the evening was beautiful. We had fantastic weather. It was in the courtyard, and it was very nice, just as last night was. At the time, Houston chapter governor, actually it was not Richard, it was John, John Espinosa, that gave information on the possibility of a trip to Mexico City during April or May, which, as you know, did transpire and was a fantastic trip. Those are the minutes of last year's national meeting. We'll need someone to make a motion to accept the minutes. Okay. We'll go with Carol. And seconded? Seconded, Richard? Okay. All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. Okay, motion carried. The minutes from last year are accepted. Into the report. The treasurer's report, the National Treasury was transferred over from Houston to San Antonio. I have to admit, I have done nothing with the Treasury, and found out just yesterday that I wasn't even on the account, so I couldn't do anything anyway. We haven't done anything on the national order regarding the Treasury, no expenses, things like that. We are going to have some this year in reimbursing for the costs, some of the costs of this meeting today. The account, let's see, the national order has a balance of $2,987.36. And that stays in there. And actually, I believe that our previous Governor General Joel Escamilla and Richard Espinosa, I believe, are on the account. So we're going to get that money transferred over to an account here in Jacksonville. So Javier, you will need to set up an account somewhere to hold the monies for the national order. Since by the end of the day today, you will be inducted as the Governor General, so the account should be here with you on the account. You and one other person here. Okay.
Definitely need at least one other person, not two, because we really had.
So total of three?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Three.
When Antonio passed away, the bank, we had to go through all kinds of hoops to get that.
Okay.
Set up our EIN numbers and everything.
Right, okay. Good to have three people then that will get on the account. We did not collect any dues, but we should. I don't know how each chapter handles the dues for each chapter. The San Antonio chapter I can tell you about because I know, but we charge $30 a year for dues, and $5 of that goes to the state state council, and $5 goes to the national. And the past 2 years, our chapter has paid $200, roughly $200 to the national for the dues, and that keeps the national order going if we have projects, or in part by funding the national meeting every year. That money coming into the national treasury is important. So we didn't collect that, but we are going to have to collect that soon for this past year. So the national order charges $5 per member for the national, to be a member of the national also. So keep that in mind, because we will need to get a membership roster, or at least not so much a roster, but the number of members that you have, and then $5 for each member made out to the national order. So that's coming, just to give you a heads up. Later, as we start getting more money in the account, we can start looking at big projects for the national order. There are a lot of things going on that we could work on. One of them, and later we're going to get a report on the Galvez statue in New Orleans and the work that statue needs. So just to keep that in mind, that's the balance for the national order at this time, $2,987.36. That money will be transferred over to Jacksonville, and invoices or statements will be going out to each chapter governor asking for the national dues for your chapter. Okay, that's the treasurer's report. So I'll need a motion to accept the treasurer's report as presented. Do we have a motion or any discussion, Richard? Do we have a second? Okay, Susan? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Okay, motion carried. I want to mention at this time something that really only affects the Texas chapters, and that is we do have a balance for the state council in Texas. Does Florida have a state council or no? No, just the national. Okay. Years ago, when the organization was started back in the 70s, we had a state councils, and those were to preside over if you had 3 or more chapters in a state. Of course, we don't have 3 chapters anymore in Texas, but also that was a time when you could not communicate very quickly. Now we have cell phones, computers, and things like that, so it's easier to manage for the national to manage different chapters. So what I'm going to propose, and apologize that this does not affect everybody, but we need it on the national meeting minutes to reflect that there has been agreement between myself, Chapter Governor of San Antonio, and Richard Espinosa, Chapter Governor in Houston, to take the funds from the state treasury and disperse them equally between the 2 chapters. So we're going to do that just to let everybody know. It only involves the Texas chapters, but we're going to work on doing that. Okay. The national has been quite active. I think we all know about Teresa Valcarce and her efforts to get a portrait of Galvez hung in the halls of Congress. It is not hung yet, but it has been painted and has been presented to Teresa. So it's a matter of time when she can coordinate when that statue of Galvez gets hung in the halls of Congress, which is a little over 200 years overdue. So, because that was a promise made by Oliver Pollock to have that done, and it was accepted by Congress at that time. So, long overdue, but Teresa did a fantastic job in leading that effort, and she was successful in doing so. Also, we have Galvez being declared an honorary citizen of the United States. So that effort is still in the works, and we expect, hopefully, to be successful on that. In looking at the names, I think there were 7, is that right? About 7 other people that have been granted honorary citizenship in the history of our country. We feel it's only right that Galvez be one of them, based on what he contributed to the American Revolution and us becoming the United States of America. So that project is ongoing as well. Is there anything more on the national scale that anybody would like to introduce or add? With that, let's see, I think we're doing okay on time. Oh, Javier?
Is there any way where we can communicate a little bit better with the different chapters that all seem to do their own? And we're not coercive enough so that we can give more of a push. Now, for instance, this presentation of the portrait, if for instance we were involved, then we could work with our congressman here, and the time that is hung, we could all go as a delegation from all the chapters and things like that. I think Pensacola does their own, and everybody else does their own, and we don't seem to involve everybody.
Right. Yeah, that's something I think that, that's the purpose of the national order, really. And it went this year, and I have to admit, I didn't coordinate that enough to where everybody could come together on that. It was mostly done by email, mostly led by Teresa, but those are the kinds of things that the national order could take the lead on. But she was pretty much doing a lot. We served as support. Each chapter, at least to my knowledge, asked the members to write letters to the congressman. We did that, our chapter. I know Houston did that. I imagine the other chapters, of course, Pensacola and Jacksonville. I'm not so sure about DC chapter, but that was part of the coordination too, to where we got the information out on what can you do, even though you're over there in San Antonio or DC or Houston, what can you do to help in the effort? And what that was writing the letters. But there could be more coordination, and like you said, and maybe an event to where we could all get together and go there for the presentation. And we can certainly send that to Teresa. I don't think she has a date yet on when that's going to be done, but she usually is very good about sending that out, sending that information out to everybody. So that's one thing that that I'm going to leave to the next Governor General. I'm going to ask briefly that Richard, why not you give us updated information on the statue of Galvez in New Orleans?
If you saw the little brochures passed around, you see the little item on there about when the plaque or mark was put in. I stopped at San Antonio on Tuesday on the way over to update myself to see what it looks like after 2 years. And I'll pass these pullers around, and it also shows the deterioration more so of the statue. The problem being that the building in back of it, you'll see, is the old World Trade Center building. It's about 20 stories. It used to be a very fancy revolving restaurant on top called the Plimsoll Club. This was the headquarters of all the shipbrokers and ship agents when all the ships used to go up the river. Now they go through a canal, someplace else. So everybody moved out of the World Trade Center. It's been vacant. It's loaded with asbestos. It's loaded with mold. It was damaged during Katrina. They never did fix it up. The city made the wonderful move of buying it from the owner, bailed the owner out. You know, San Antonio, New Orleans is great for those moves. They can't find anyone willing to tear it down. It can't be imploded because it's across the street from the casino, next to the Hilton Hotel, next to the Riverwalk, next to the Algiers Ferry. It's going to be pulled down manually. And one of the things we talked to the city about was putting a line item in the demolition contract to move the statue, refurbish it, then put it back. But that's still pending because they can't find anyone to tear it down for the money. They have no money in New Orleans. It's a perennial problem there with funding. So it sits there. If it doesn't work, we're going to press them again to either refurbish it in place, which has to be done in the summertime because the bronzing process has to be under warm conditions. Wintertime, they have to move the statue. They have done that to several statues in the city, including Andrew Jackson's in Jackson Square. So we're hoping that over the next year we can push the city to do something with it because it's missing some parts and it doesn't look good at all. The plaque, by the way, some of you contributed funds to it, is still in good shape. The color is holding up. It looks in good shape. So it was a good move, and people actually stop and read it. But the statue is so dingy, it doesn't attract their attention. That's where we stand right now.
Just a question.
Yes.
Richard, can they get that moved? Maybe if you're going to take it down in the winter time, you put it back somewhere else.
Well, the problem
Someplace
is,
more relevant to him.
Canal Street is a good location because there's lots of people walk past it on the river walk. Right on the river there, it's called Spanish Plaza. There's a big circular fountain and all that sort of stuff with tiles from each one of the provinces of Spain. So it's kind of coexistent there. And some of the casino people, when they lose money, they go over there and cry in front of the staff. It's kind of a tradition.
So it serves a purpose. Maybe that's why the bronze is losing, it's all the tears.
I mean, we could get contribution from the casino instantly because the city taps their, they'd be very happy to give us money to refurbish that statue. But no one's approached them yet. So we're gonna try that this coming year.
Can we raise it so that it's a little bit safer from vandals and whatever?
Well, it's not really not vandalism, it's weather. It's been sitting
Weather.
here now for, since 1975, and through hurricanes, weather, storm, cold, hot, and statues, about every 20 years have to be refurbished. So that's the problem with it. Vandalism really isn't a problem for some reason. It's missing a couple of parts, but those are because of weather conditions.
It's just a natural weathering, and that happens to all bronze statues. As you said, about every 20 years or so, they need to be refinished, and that might be a good project. 2 years ago, we had the project of the plaque.
Yeah.
The plaque at that statue was on the ground, and people would walk by, they wouldn't see it. They'd trip over it and wonder, who is this guy? That must be George Washington.
Look like George Washington.
Yeah, so the what you see in the picture, I guess the picture is the plaque?
Yeah.
Yeah, the plaque about a few feet off the ground
Yeah.
on a concrete stanchion, and the plaque is in full color, has the map, has a portrait of Galvez, and talks about his Gulf Coast campaign and the contributions that Spain gave during the American Revolution. So people, Richard has gone by many times, I think he has family there, and he has noticed, just in observing, that people stop and read that plaque because it's colorful, it's higher, it's not just on the ground. So that's a project that we all accomplished. Each chapter contributed to that. And so that's something that we as an organization did, and people will actually read and know now that is Galvez and know who he is. So maybe the next project is working on, and we can approach the casino, that's probably a good option. Okay. At this time, we'll get into our keynote speaker this morning. And I have to tell you that I heard this lady speak probably a year ago or so at a meeting that I went to in San Antonio of another organization. And as I was listening to what she said, but I was thinking in my head, I've got to get this lady to speak at our meeting, one of our meetings in San Antonio, and we did. And she came and spoke to our group. She is dynamic, she is that good, and I love every presentation that I hear her speak at. So Dr. Carolina Castillo Crimm was born and raised in Mexico City.
She's going to do that.
Oh, you're going to tell that? Oh, okay. I didn't have that. Okay. Well, scratch that from the record. Like a judge saying, scratch that from your memory. I will then introduce Carol Salinas to come in here and introduce our speaker. I apologize.
No, I didn't want you hogging my speech.
Okay. Good you stopped.
Anyway, I'm not a public speaker. You could probably do a much better job. Okay, well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Carolyn Crimm. I met her when Javier and I went to Mexico City back in May with the Houston chapter. I heard her speak and I was riveted by her lecture. So I invited her on the spot to give the same speech to us. She's an award-winning professor, and I guarantee that she will bring Bernardo de Galvez alive. She was born in Mexico City and came to the United States in 1963. She's completely bilingual. Her specialty is Latin American history of the 18th and 19th centuries. She received her PhD at the University of Texas in Austin. She also has a degree from the University of Miami in history. She's now a retired professor from Sam Houston State University and is currently busy creating historical fiction. One of the people she writes about is Bernardo de Galvez. You know, our purpose is to inform the public about his exploits. And I think I see how this could happen fairly quickly. Here's what I predict will happen. And you may think this is silly, but it could happen. she's going to write a successful and highly readable novel about de Galvez. The script gets picked up by Hollywood. There's even rumors that Colin Firth will accept the leading role. The movie is a sensation. From that point on, de Galvez's name is then on everyone's lips. Please welcome Dr. Crimm and prepare to be educated and entertained.
Thank you, Carol. It's always a pleasure to have somebody so wonderful do an introduction, because then you feel so warm and comfortable. Thank you. Also, thank all of you for giving me the opportunity to share Bernardo de Galvez with people who already know everything there is to know about Bernardo de Galvez. But I think the important thing about Bernardo is that he was a man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He was a man whose persistence and courage in the face of incredible odds was able to make his way to the absolute top of the Spanish hierarchy. And this is a man that I think all of us, and I think Carol is right, his ideas, his beliefs, his views should be emulated by people everywhere. And certainly a movie about him should be something that is tremendously influential and tremendously important for people from everywhere. And one of the things that I think we have to look at in Bernardo de Galvez is his ability to overcome odds. How on earth this man was able to do the things that he did, I think, starts with his little town of Macharavyaya. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Don Manuel Olmedo Checa. He is the man who introduced me to Bernardo de Galvez. It was by accident. I happened to be at the library. I had joined the Houston chapter of the Granaderos de Galvez, and I had happened to be in Malaga, and one Sunday morning, I went up the mountain to Macharavyaya and found this little tiny town. How many of y'all have been to Macharavyaya? Just 2 of you. Okay, if you ever get a chance, definitely, you should go. Si fuiste? Fuiste. The important thing about Macharavyaya is it's a town that had no water. It's a little tiny town on the top of a mountain. And I want you to imagine young Bernardo de Galvez, who had to make his way from that little town to the Viceroy of Mexico. He started off poor, and Don Manuel Olmedo Checa inspired me when he took me to the house of Ayes Galvez. It's a family that has had a palace across the street, literally across the street, from the Malaga Cathedral for 200 years. And when we walked into the living room, that portrait was hanging there. And I probably shouldn't admit it, but I cried. I literally, to see a magnificent portrait like that had been hanging for 200 years and that had been revered by the Ayes family all that time. And this is something that now that we have a copy of this portrait, this is the kind of thing that people in the United States need to see, that Spanish courage and Spanish culture could make a man succeed the way he did. Now, certainly we hope that statues will begin to abound all over the United States. This one, of course, from the King of Spain in 1976. And We hope that soon we will have one in Galveston. And so when we look at the little town of Macharaviaya, one of the things about it, since it is fairly far out of town, up in the mountains, it's a little town, a beautiful, beautiful little town. But if you can imagine little Bernardo as a young boy, his family were farmers. They were not wealthy nobles, as you would have, everybody always wants to have their ancestors be famous nobles and very rich and everything. He wasn't. He was a little boy whose father and uncle were both of them very intelligent. But can you imagine this little boy having to carry every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, with a piece of wood across his shoulders, buckets of water for his mother, up a steep hill from the creek in the valley, carrying that load for his mother up the hill day after day from the time he was little until he was 11, every day hauling water. That taught him persistence. If he spilled the water, he had to go back for more. That gave him the belief that if he just kept at it, that if he just kept going, he could succeed. And sure enough, eventually, his uncle, many, many years later, his uncle actually put water through ducts into Macharaviaya, but at the time, little Bernardo had to do it himself. Now, his uncle, Jose de Galvez, was another man who was tremendously important. And Jose de Galvez had actually started off as a man who was going to be involved in the church. The bishop had seen this young man in Macharaviaya and had taken him to Malaga in order to be trained for the priesthood. Jose de Galvez decided law was the way to go. Now, I don't know whether it's true or not, but there is the apocryphal story that Jose de Galvez, as an attorney for the French court, defeated the Spanish king's attorney in a court case. The king, Charles III, called him into court and said, "Why have you defeated? You are a Spaniard. How dare you defeat the Spanish in our own country?" And Jose de Galvez told him, the law is above the king. The king could very easily have sent him to the galleys for punishment. The king instead sent him to the New World to inspect and to find out what was happening in his kingdoms. Meanwhile, Bernardo de Galvez, his father had gone to Tenerife as a member of the Cantabrian Regiment, and Bernardo de Galvez joins the military in its attack on Almeida in Portugal. This was part of the 7 Years' War, or as we call it in the United States, the French and Indian War. So in this case, what Bernardo de Galvez learned was, number one, to face gunfire bravely. Yes, they were defeated, but he learned to fight. And he learned that it's important to know your territory, to know what you're going to be facing. The peace of 1763, of course, made a huge, huge difference to what was going on in the entire world during this period, because remember, Havana had fallen to the British. The British had conquered Havana, and because of that, also remember that, because that's going to be important later, but in order to get Havana back, the Spanish were willing to give up East and West Florida. And the French were booted out of Canada, and the French gave Louisiana to the King of Spain. So suddenly, all of Louisiana is now Spanish. What are you going to do with it? Of course, Carlos III of Spain, not a very prepossessing king, I admit, he started with the suggestions from José de Galvez. He began to create a series of Bourbon reforms, changes in the New World. And these changes are the ones that are going to affect everything that happens in the New World from then on out. Among the Bourbon reforms, he had found a new method of producing silver. And so silver was now starting to flow into the coffers of Spain. He removed the Jesuits because the Jesuits had become a threat to the Spanish crown. The Jesuits controlled more money and more land than the Spanish crown did. José de Galvez was given the task of removing the Jesuits from the New World. Can you imagine what it was like for the Jesuits, given 1 week, 1 week, to pack up their things and leave? If your brother, your cousin, your uncle was a Jesuit, think of what that was like. If your teachers were Jesuits, think of what that was like to suddenly have these people ripped from your life. They were gone. Was there antagonism? Yes, there was. José de Galvez also realized that a lot of the criollos, the Creoles, the people that were born in the New World of Spanish blood, they were not mestizos, they were not mixed bloods, they were Spaniards, but they were not peninsulares. They were criollos. They were born in the New World. And these criollos, who had become tremendously important in all of the top positions in New Spain, are finding that they are more loyal to their local area, to their ciudad chica, than they were to Spain. And as part of the Bourbon reforms, José de Galvez begins to send, in 1767, a whole shipload of peninsulares arrives in Mexico in order to remove the criollos and to place loyal Spaniards in their place. Likewise, the king also lowered the taxes. Up until this time, the taxes had been 20%. The king's fifth, el quinto, the 20%, the king's fifth. And he lowered it to 10%. The only catch was he made sure it was collected by his peninsulares. Up until this time, you could do the obedezco pero no cumplo. I obey, but I do not comply. Oh, I can't pay my taxes this year. The cattle were dying, and I couldn't pay my taxes last year because there was a drought, and I couldn't pay my taxes the year before that. And suddenly, the king says, okay, now they're only 10%, now you pay. And the peninsulares were there to make sure you did pay. Is it any wonder that not many years later, the criollos and the mestizos joined hands to separate from Spain in 1810. The reaction, of course, at the time was anger from the criollos. The peninsulares were the ones who took over. But as so often happens, the criollos quickly found ways to intermarry, to marry their daughters off to the peninsulares who were arriving. And so now you suddenly had the local people back in control. Now, in the spring of 1769, we come back to our friend José de Galvez, visitor of the Indies, and he spent, if you can believe it, 6 years and rode 8,000 miles across the entire northern areas of New Spain. He created the Old Spanish Trail. He created the missions in California. He sent Junipero Serra into California in order to establish the missions. So this is a man who did a tremendous amount in order to encourage Spanish settlement. At the same time, his nephew, Bernardo de Galvez, is going to be sent to Chihuahua. Now, anybody who has actually lived in Texas has probably been out to West Texas, and when you see this kind of landscape, you can imagine what it was like for young Bernardo. And in this case, he had a command of 150 men and 1,000 horses and mules, because remember, you always had to have a remuda, a group of horses of usually between 7 to 10 horses each. And he was sent to attack the Apache. They rode as much as 20 leagues a day, riding into the night for 20 days across land that looks like that. They had covered approximately 800 kilometers to get up to the Pecos River, to reach the Pecos River. And having almost run out of provisions without finding a single Apache, the troop, needless to say, was demoralized and exhausted. But Lieutenant Galvez, young Bernardo de Galvez, remember he had fought at Almeida in Portugal, and he knew that he might be going into a death trap. But what he said was, "My companions, the day has arrived to make the final effort. You have proved to the entire world the proof of your constancy as you have suffered cold, freezing, and hunger. I don't know how many more days or months it will take to find our enemy, but we cannot return to Chihuahua with the knowledge that we have wasted time and effort without finding our enemy. I will go alone if no one will accompany me. But I will carry out our duty for all of us, or pay with my life for the king's bread that I have eaten. Those of you with weak hearts may turn back now, but those of you who would join me in our glorious efforts, follow me now." With that, he spurred his horse and crossed the Pecos River. By dawn of the next day, they had found the Apache camp, and Bernardo and his troops defeated and captured the Apache, returning them to Chihuahua. Surprisingly enough, while the Apache were in captivity in Chihuahua, Bernardo learned to communicate with them. He learned the pidgin language that they used, and he came to appreciate their customs. His interest resulted in a book entitled Notices and Reflections on the War Against the Apache in the Provinces of New Spain. That book was sent to the king. His friendship with the prisoners allowed him the opportunity to convince them once again to help him in attacking other Apache tribes. How on earth he talked them into doing that? He talked his men into attacking, he talked the Apache into helping him. This is a man that must have had an amazing ability to convince others, Apaches, British, Spanish, his own men, to do things that they might never have done otherwise. The following year, unhappily, a group of Apache attacked the town of Chihuahua, and his soldiers mounted and rode out after them. He was in church at the time. He was notified that his men had gone after the Apache, and he and 2 of his men mounted up and went after them. 5 Apache surrounded them and attacked them. Bernardo de Galvez did not give up. His 2 men were killed, but Bernardo de Galvez fought back, and he fought 5 Apache to a standstill, and they finally left him, wounded and nearly dead. But Bernardo de Galvez did not give up. He learned to accept wounds, he learned to accept the pain. It was part of being a soldier. The next year, he returns to Spain. To recuperate, he becomes a teacher at the Military Academy of Avila, and while he was there, he was assigned to help with an attack that one of the local generals, in this case O'Reilly, General O'Reilly in 1774, 2 years later, decided they were going to attack Argel, where pirates had begun to harass everybody in the Mediterranean. O'Reilly, in his attack on Argel, did not, unhappily, make the kind of investigation that he should have. And sure enough, when they attacked, the Spanish were soundly defeated. Many of them were nearly abandoned on the fortified coast. Bernardo de Galvez stayed with his men as a captain and commanding his regiment from Sevilla. He was caught in the devastating crossfire of the Arab defenders, and he was seriously wounded, but he still made sure that his men were saved. He got them back on board the ship and learned a very valuable lesson about attacking other forces. You do it when you know what you're going up against. Finally, by 1777, he is placed in control of the town of New Orleans. He arrived in late 1776, September of 1776, and then when Luis Unzaga, the governor, left, Bernardo de Galvez was named governor of Louisiana. Now remember what was going on at this time. This is one of the things that we have to remember. We can't just see Bernardo outside of the history that was going on around him. And in this case, the American Revolution had just started, and fortunately, Bernardo de Galvez was given permission by his uncle to send supplies up the river. While he was in New Orleans, he also met the beautiful Marie Félicité de Saint-Maxent. She was the widow d'Estrahan. She already had a daughter, Adelaide, and Bernardo de Galvez, in the winter of 1777, was coming down with a disease that would eventually kill him, amoebic dysentery. He thought he was dying, and because of his love for this beautiful young woman, by the way, this isn't really a picture of her, but it was too good to pass up. What he thought was his deathbed, he convinces her on his deathbed to marry him. And so sure enough, they are married in December of 1777. Bernardo de Galvez and Marie Félicité had a marriage that was so full of love that he did not follow the custom of the time of living in separate bedrooms. They always shared the same bed in the same room, and this was very unusual for that time period. Now, he was also allowed by his uncle and encouraged by an Irish merchant, Oliver Pollock, to provide secret aid to the Americans. This is the Mississippi River. This was the only way they had of moving supplies up the river to the Americans. Bernardo de Galvez hired men to row 10-ton barges up the Mississippi because you couldn't sail. The only way you could get supplies, 3 months that it took of rowing these barges up the Mississippi. And General George Rogers Clark in Illinois would not have won against the British had it not been for the supplies that Oliver Pollock and Bernardo de Galvez were shipping up the Mississippi. Some of those supplies, the guns, the powder, the ammunition, even, surprisingly enough, the Mexicans kind of made a mistake. They shipped red uniforms up the river. But the Mexicans figured they could dye them darker, whatever. So in this case, Bernardo de Galvez, and he actually used his own money to do this. He gave of his own money in order to get the supplies up the river to the troops. Now, I don't need to do much of the history of the war itself because you all know it. Certainly, the Spanish territory and control of New Orleans was going to be a constant problem for the British. The British, who held everything of East and West Florida, the British are going to control Manchac, Baton Rouge, Natchez, the entire eastern side of the Mississippi. But it was Bernardo de Galvez in 1779 who has to decide what is he going to do. Think about what you would have done if you were in New Orleans. You know that the Spanish are not particularly strong. He doesn't have a large armed force in New Orleans. Would you have stayed? Most of the town council wanted to get the heck out of there. Let's go back to Mexico. Let's go to Havana. Let's get out of here. And Bernardo de Galvez said, the British don't know yet that Spain has declared war. Bernardo de Galvez put his group together, and he managed to create, in September of 1779, 1,500 men. 400 of them were regular army. The remainder were untrained militia units that he had recruited: Acadians, Spaniards, Frenchmen, Germans, Indians, slaves, free blacks, and even Texans from Nacogdoches, San Antonio, and La Bahia. He also received 10,000 cattle from Texas, the first of the cattle drives. He attacked Manchac, and he also requested money from the little town of Malaga, where he had been from. This is a picture of the church in Malaga today. It has no tower. Why? Because the people of Malaga sent 400,000 reales to help the Americans during the American Revolution. And it was Bernardo de Galvez who gave that money to Rochambeau, the French admiral, to pay for his troops and his navy to blockade Yorktown and protect George Washington. Had it not been for Malaga, Rochambeau would never have been able to protect Washington. Galvez, because his council of war was opposed and because of the British threat to attack from Canada and from Pensacola, he put his little ships together, and sure enough, a hurricane is going to hit his ships. Again, remember persistence? Is he going to give up? He doesn't. He raises the ships that have been sunk, he resupplies them with what he can, and he attacks first at Manchac and then at Baton Rouge. He defeated the British forces at Manchac, he defeated the British forces at Pensacola, and then without setting foot in Natchez, he manages to talk the British into giving him Natchez as well. The man must have had an incredible ability. His grenadiers, then, are the ones who are now going to fight not only at Manchac and Baton Rouge, but he says we are going to attack Mobile. And when he decides they are going to attack Mobile with the help of the 1st Texas Cattle, when he attacks Mobile in 1780, once again, he does it without support from Havana. Why? Why would Havana not help him? The reason the people in Havana, the generals in Havana, didn't want to help him is because Havana was in danger of being captured by the British again. They had just been captured just a few years earlier, and the people in Havana were panicked over this. But the people in Havana still gave of their money and their jewels and their gold for the American Revolution. And Bernardo de Galvez, with his motley crew, is able to defeat the British at Mobile. He says, I have got to march on Pensacola immediately. What happens in Havana? Oh, no, we don't think so. No, you can't. They are afraid of being captured, and because of a lack of Spanish fleet, Galvez himself has to go to Havana and convince the generals in Havana that they must help him. Once again, persistence. Luckily, his uncle, Jose de Galvez, sends the fleet of 600 ships from Gibraltar. And with that, and his recruits from Louisiana and Texas, Jose de Galvez now is going to attack Pensacola. As we all know, under the guns of the Red Bluff Battery, he asks Admiral Calvo de Irazabal to enter Pensacola Bay, and Irazabal refuses. Once again, Bernardo de Galvez, where's my quote? He's always quoting. He gets one of the 32-pound cannonballs that has been fired from the British battery, and he sends it to Admiral Calvo Irazabal. And he says, this 32-pound cannonball comes from the fort of the British at the entry. He who has courage and honor may follow me. I am going ahead on my ship to remove your fear. The admiral, of course, responded in absolute fury that someone under his command would dare to disobey. Bernardo de Galvez unfurled his banner on his little 12-gun ship, the Galveztown, and followed by 2 small launches, sailed under the guns of the fort at Red Cliffs. It took him 3 months. 3 months. But because he went in alone, Bernardo de Galvez is able to force the Spanish to follow him, and from February to May of 1781, the longest battle in the American Revolution, Bernardo de Galvez at last manages to drop a cannonball into the powder magazine of the Queen's Battery. The next day, the British were forced to accept defeat. Now, I've had arguments with history professors at the university, at Louisiana State University, who says that Bernardo de Galvez's success on the Mississippi River and in the Gulf were not important. I disagree. Had the British held the Mississippi and the Gulf Coast, perhaps they might not have launched an attack on Washington from the rear. But there is no doubt in anyone's mind that the money that Bernardo de Galvez gave to Rochambeau to stop the attack would not have made a difference. It did make a difference. The British on the Mississippi might not have come to Cornwallis's aid, but they could very easily have stopped the supplies coming up the Mississippi River. And so when Yorktown and the French fleet up there on the right-hand side, Duquesne and Rochambeau's fleet, all of it, had they not been there, George Washington would not have won at Yorktown. So did his victory help Washington? I think it did. I think it did. And certainly Washington, oh, by the way, Washington's white horse, you know where he got it? Bernardo de Galvez. It came from Texas. The war in the United States was over. But did that stop Bernardo de Galvez? No. He attacks the Bahamas in 1782 and captures the Bahamas. And if the war had not been stopped in 1783, Bernardo de Galvez would have captured Jamaica as well. And the entire British control of the Caribbean would have ended. The war ended 1 month too soon. The shield of the Count of Galvez, as we all know, bears the fleur-de-lis symbol of Louisiana at their own request, his ship, the Galvestown, his emblem, Yo Solo, and of course, the cross of the Order of Carlos III. The Count of Galvez, this portrait, is the one that has now been copied and is hopefully going to hang in Washington, D.C. Now, as we have said, we're hoping that perhaps the efforts by Senator Rubio and Senator Cornyn of Texas to get honorary U.S. citizenship for Galvez can perhaps be tied to the hanging of this portrait. We hope. And that's what we're looking forward to doing. Teresa Valcarce is going to be in Dallas on November 6th and 7th. And if anybody would like to go up, I am going up to have supper with her. If you all would like to meet her, she wants to thank everybody for having helped her with the bringing of the portrait to this area. So we will be having dinner in Dallas on November 6th. So if anybody's interested in going, I will be happy to take you with me. So, are there any questions? It was a man named Montserrat. Montserrat, he's a Spanish painter, and he's done I kind of disapprove of the fact that he made him skinnier, but, you know, whatever. Makes him look good. So, yes?
There's also a copy in the old State House in Baton Rouge of Galvez.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Same
All right.
painting, or-
The same painting?
Yeah, same painting.
Excellent, excellent, excellent.
He's also an honorary citizen of Louisiana.
Yes, because of your efforts, was it not? And hopefully we can extend that to success in making him an honorary citizen of the United States. The 8th of very, very few. But there are other generals, French generals from the American Revolution that are included. So he deserves to be. Yes?
Dr. Kim, can you tell us a little bit more about La Manquita? The one-armed lady.
Yes, La Manquita, they call it La Manquita because the tower that they were going to finish was never completed because the money was sent to the New World. And so the church today is still without its tower because they have never had the money to complete the tower. So La Manquita means the armless one. The armless one. La Manquita. Anybody who is manco has only one arm. Okay. If we had more time, we would talk about his success as a viceroy. He came back to Mexico and was a viceroy, tremendously successful as a viceroy. He loved the people of Mexico. Actually, because of his wife and his own populist beliefs, because remember, he was born poor, he was not born rich, and because of his populist beliefs and his wife's French leanings, he was accused when he started Chapultepec Castle. He was accused of trying to build a castle for himself so that he could start a revolt against the King of Spain. Not so, but that was the accusation that some of the people made against him. And certainly his wife, after his death, his wife goes back to Madrid And because she had French tertulias, she spoke French, of course, being from French Louisiana, but she was accused by Charles IV, especially after the French Revolution in 1789. She was accused of being a spy for the French, and she was exiled to Zaragoza, and she lived in Zaragoza, hated it. It was cold and miserable and rainy and ugly, and she finally, after the Conde de Aranda was replaced in the Spanish court, the Conde de Aranda brought her back to Madrid, and unhappily she died in 1790. Her son, Miguel, by Bernardo, did not survive long enough. He actually became a member of the Calatrava. He was knighted as a noble in the court of Calatrava. And his two sisters, unhappily, both of them married Italian counts. And because of their Italian connection, they lost any interest in their Spanish roots and their Spanish heritage. And this portrait was sold as part of their inheritance. And so the Galvez family that exists today, there are still many, many people that are Galvez, but most of them come from the other Matias and Miguel and some of the other Matias brothers, some of the other Galvez brothers, not from Bernardo de Galvez. But yes, he was an amazing man, and because of his persistence, I think he was able to succeed in doing many, many things that all of us would like to have been able to copy. Yes?
How much longer did he live after his marriage?
He lived until 1786, yeah. So he had 3 children. He had 3 children. He married.
So he gets married in his deathbed, but
He didn't die. He didn't die. He thought he was going to, and so he still talked her into marrying him, even if he was going to die. Don't know how he did that, yeah. The man had a silver tongue. What can you say?
There's some indication that the stepdaughter came back to Louisiana.
Yes, she
married
did.
Louisiana, Boré.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Adelaide. So, yeah. But amazing person, you know, the success that he had. So, yeah, he talked people into doing things that you would never believe possible.
What happened to his children?
That's what I said. His son died, Miguel died, after, I think he was 20-some. He never married, never had any children. And then his 2 daughters, were the ones that went to Italy, married Italian counts.
So all his ancestors are through his daughters?
Through his daughters, and so they're not Galvez, yeah. But there are still lots of Galvezes around there. All right, any other questions? Thank you.